Hello, brothers and sisters. Raven here, and today I'm going to review some things I did in the past. This is not going to be a review of everything. It's just that with everything I found in my studies and the books and things, I decided to go back and look at the basics again. Because, as I mentioned before when I did previous videos, which I'll give links in case you missed them, I'd gone through their points on the Homestead Heritage webpage. They had 2 pages, beliefs and then Q&A. The Q&A, there were only a few things that were really the questions. And those were what I really focused on. Most of what was in the Q&A was just about their lifestyle, what they do there, not much about their beliefs. So that I'm not going to touch much right now. Right now, though, I want to go to the beliefs page because after all the studies I've done, everything I've found about what they're actually teaching, there are things I did not understand, things I did not notice, things that I have to admit snuck in on me and I was completely oblivious to them. I did not realize what I was reading. Going through them this time, I noticed that most of this had nothing to do with their beliefs. The majority of this was nothing but their political views, basically, and just how or reasons they come about their beliefs. But they never explain what the beliefs that they're coming to the conclusion of in this. They just talk about, here's where we came to our decision on what the Trinity is, or what this is, what that is. But they don't come and tell you, here's what it is that the conclusion was. It just, here's how we studied before we decided a conclusion. That's the kind of thing they do. It's very weird. There's only a few things in this whole page that really go into what they believe, and that's not until the very end of it. It's something I've seen many places, many times, where you have to read a lot of babble before you get to the meat of it. By the time you get there, you can get into the pattern that they've given you and completely miss what's going on. To give an example of what they do, here's one that I didn't realize what was going on my first time, but now I can see what's happening. At one point they say this: we believe in the absolute necessity for any true individual of corporate life in God, of an encounter with the transcendent God who is biblically portrayed as breaking into and redefining human experience and understanding through revelation and regeneration. This actual entry into God's presence goes far beyond a belief in merely propositional or scholastic or rationalistic knowledge about God, salvation, and Scripture. We do not fault theological menus, but believe they have little value unless believers can eat the promised meat. Here's the issue. This statement is saying, here's what we don't think is enough. Here's what we think is missing. They say, what we think is necessary is this encounter with God. But they give you nothing about what exactly do you mean by an encounter. They don't explain anything of how you get that. They don't go into any of that. You see what I'm getting at? They avoid explaining to you what they're ultimately going to have you do if you join. They don't want to give you the actual answer to what would be the question leading to this. They just want to give you an idea of, here's how we're going to come to an answer so that you feel confident they're doing it the right way before you find out what their actual conclusion is. This is what they do throughout this. And this is why I'll say, first and foremost, do not just go through the Q&A or the beliefs page and feel like that's all you needed, because there's so much hidden. Instead, go to the books they suggest, because after a lot of these, they tell you, if you want to know more, go to this, read this book. Usually one of Blair Adams' books. You read that, it'll go more into it, and if you're really reading it, you're not just skimming or just assuming, you're going to see there's a lot more that they don't show you here. And that's the other thing I noticed. Like I said, don't skim. Because I realize now, looking back on the way I read this the first time and how I read it now, I realize that the way they do this, it's both beautiful and hideous. What's hideous is what they're trying to do with it. What's beautiful is just how well and artistically they do it, because they really are careful to make it where this is something where they're going to give specifics, but you are not going to look at those. You're going to just look at the general, and you're just going to go by assumption. It's done in a way where it kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? It kind of pushes you to read it as though you're skimming it. It's a very interesting way they do it, but that's what happens. And that's what I had to fight myself on when I just now went back to look at it again. Because they try to pull you into looking at it that way. The other thing I want to bring up is from a whole other point in this, where they talk about communion. I'm not going to go into detail because I'll tell you there's a lot more they do with communion that is just disturbing. But what they have here can sound good, but ultimately I'd say it's very unbiblical. Here's what they say. We believe the Lord's Supper is a memorial of Jesus' singular sacrifice, which that's what Jesus said it was. This you do in remembrance of me. That's the only point he gave to it. That's it. He didn't add anything more to it. He just said that's all it's about. They go and they put that in here at the beginning, but only the very small part at the beginning. Then they say, but. We believe the Lord's Supper is a memorial of Jesus' singular sacrifice, but at the same time, same time, adding to what Christ said, also signifies and celebrates the ongoing and growing communion in the sacrificial death of Jesus. Now, hold on a second. That can sound okay. That can sound good. Because what that can sound like is that you're celebrating and rejoicing over the fact that people are still being saved by it. But don't let that become an assumption. Okay, that's what I did my first time reading it. Do not do that. Do not go by any assumption. Wait until they tell you. Wait until they clarify that that's what they're talking about. Because watch what they say after this. Growing communion in the sacrificial death of Jesus that committed disciples actually do share in their daily life with one another in the Lord. So this isn't about celebrating that he did it and people are still coming to it, that it still has its effect. No, celebrating that we're going through the same thing. If you've watched an earlier video, you'll see here something that they quote very much comes into play in one of Blair Adams' books. But here they don't go as far as he did. They take this, and boy, do they hold to it to an extreme. In this sense, we hearken back to the original Anabaptist self-definition of the community of the committed. Thus, they're making the community what the communion's about. Communion represents the rededication of the individual and the church. Rededication of the pledge originally made at baptism in the sacrificial death of Jesus. The Bible only says it's for your reminder, not a rededication. Just a reminder of what he did. And you'll notice what they actually do ultimately with this goes against that. Watch. Rededication of the pledge originally made at baptism in the sacrificial death of Jesus, which a life lived in love for others entails. This is supposed to be done in memorial of what he did, and they're making it all about what you are doing. They are flipping it. They're saying it's in memory of him and what he did. But then they're going there telling you, you do it. You now have to do the same thing. And then at the end, it's all about that pledge to do that. It's no longer about what he did, but what you are going to do. See the clever way they did this? It can sound good. And the way they start it, they word it in a way where you'll make an assumption that then makes the rest of it something that doesn't sound so bad based on that assumption. But if you don't do that, if you do not just assume what you believe is in this, you'll find, that's not where it goes. So, now that we know what they're looking at, let me reread what happened earlier after that but. At the same time, also signifies and celebrates the ongoing and growing communion in the sacrificial death of Jesus that committed disciples actually do share in their daily life. Signifies and celebrates the ongoing and growing of this sacrificial death. The reason this is unbiblical is because with this, they are saying something Jesus said was a lie. It is finished. That's what they do. Again, other things on these points, on these pages that bothered me, I put in other video, and I'll try to put links in the description or maybe even in a comment so that you can go back and look at those videos as well. But these are ones that jumped at me now going back and rereading. And I'll tell you, do not go and read these pages and assume you know what they're saying, and assume that you understand and agree with it until you've read the books they mention below and you really have read them for yourself. Do that first, because they're not really giving you the answer here. They're only showing you the cloak they want to wear. Look at it very carefully. Make sure you don't assume anything. Go into it with a completely blank slate. Look at it that way and make sure they really are giving you answers and filling in any holes. Don't just throw anything in there by assumption. And you'll see there's a lot they don't give you. There's a lot that remains unexplained, empty, unanswered. So if they can't just give you simple, basic, straightforward answers, instead of going around in this juggling act of telling you, here's why we come to our conclusion, here's why we do this and that, without ever coming to the conclusion, you know there's something there they're not showing. Whereas if they just come out and tell you, here's what we believe, leave it at that, then you know they're being honest. If you disagree, you disagree. And they don't worry about that. Here, they're worried about that. If there's any further questions, always feel free to ask. Send an email, however you want to do it. Just let me know if there's something more you're curious about, something maybe you've read on the webpage, you don't quite understand what they're doing, doesn't make sense to you, and you want more of an explanation. You could do what they say, go read the book. Or you could always send me a question and I'll try to tell you what I found when I was reading the book. But again, make sure you're figuring it out. Make sure you're not just assuming what others tell you. That's why I didn't accept this, because I didn't assume. Always test it. I'll see you guys next time. God bless.